Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. Feel free to keep using that chat box. Just say hi. It's always fun to just see where people are joining from throughout the state. So if you're new here, we hold these monthly events on the last Wednesday of each month through October. I'm Candace Shively. I'm with the Division of Water Resources, and I'm really happy to be a part of the team that brings you these events each month. And again, as we get started, feel free to keep using that chat box and say hi. Um, got some folks from St. George. That's awesome. We started this event last April. The goal is to support people that are planning, establishing, and maintaining waterwise or water efficient landscapes. Here in Utah, we do have a landscape incentive program, which offers up to $3 per square foot for lawn that's replaced with water efficient landscaping. These price points and the eligibility does vary by location. If you are planning to participate in that program, do not kill or remove your lawn until your project has been approved. That's very important. We do need to verify that there's living lawn within the project area before you start. So if you have any questions about that program or you want to check out eligibility, requirements, incentive amounts, take a look at slowtheflow.org. And I will email that information as well as any resources that are mentioned during today's event out to you all later today. This session is being recorded. I'll also share that in the follow-up email. This month, I'm excited. We have Dr. Kelly Kopp joining us. Kelly is with Utah State University Extension. She's our turfgrass and water conservation specialist. And I know that sounds like a very odd thing to pair those two together, but lawn definitely has a place in the water conservation space. And with our current water conditions and many areas starting to implement outdoor watering restrictions, this event could not come at a better time. So Kelly is going to talk about how much water your lawn actually needs, types of lawn that require less water, a little less water than you may think, and then some strategies to help you improve your watering and maintenance practices. But before we do that, we're going to start with our landscape experts, Katie and Ben. They're going to lead our late maintenance minute and just share some things that you're watching for, some tasks that you're doing in your landscape between now and our next event in May. Katie and Ben are both pros with USU Extension. Katie's located in Salt Lake County and Ben is in Washington County. So between the two of them, we should have our geographically diverse state pretty well covered. So let's get started with Katie and then we'll hop over to Ben.
Okay, perfect. And I just want to make sure that that is sharing okay.
Yes, we're not in presentation mode, but we are seeing your slides.
Does it look okay? Can I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So this is we're going to talk about northern Utah landscape tips for just a minute. And I want to start off and just say we're really urging people to wait to start irrigating their landscapes in northern Utah. Our friends at Jordan Valley Water District are saying about May 15th would be a good period to wait until we start to turn on those systems. And you can, of course, spot and hand water as needed. And this actually helps you with a more resilient landscape as well. Like, for example, with your trees, shrubs, and perennials. We just had recent rains here in northern Utah, and it helped push moisture nice deep down into the soil profile. And plant roots like to grow into wet soil. So they're going to start to move with that landscape water downward if they're not getting a lot of surface application of water. So it actually helps as you get into the warmer summer months if you wait to water in the spring, because you're going to have nice, deeper root depths in your landscape plants. And so that's something to think about. Oh, hold on a second. There we go. Okay. And my next tip is to keep it covered. So try to avoid areas of bare soil and consider waiting possibly until fall for new plantings, but that doesn't mean that you can't do some soil prep now. And so these were actually a couple of pictures I snapped this morning on a little walk. I like this picture here with the mulch, bark mulch that's getting ready to go down, that they're just putting that down on a kind of a 2 to 3 inch thick layer just to keep that soil covered so it's not bare. It's going to help to retain some of that water that is down in the soil. And you have those larger mature landscape trees, and so they're going to be drawing from that water in the soil as well. So we want to really try to keep the moisture there. Not as big of a fan of rock mulch. It tends to really heat up. It doesn't really do much for us in terms of helping to keep moisture in that system, and it can become kind of a headache as well from a weed perspective. So something to think about there. but keeping soil covered is really important. I don't know why I'm not advancing. Hold on one second, guys. Hold on. I'm going to turn my camera off and then I think I'll be able to. Hold on one second. Sorry about that, guys. All right. Okay, so the next one here, if you can still see that okay, is just a couple landscape shots that I took years past. One I really like, this is a new planting here, and it has its own little individual umbrella. So it can really be kind of a high maintenance way to add a little extra shading. It's kind of a funny slide more than anything. But when we do have really hot and dry summers, it can be an opportunity to take advantage of other techniques for soil preparation. This is soil solarization. So this is putting clear plastic down. You want to get this area as flat as possible to put water down on the soil before putting the clear plastic down, and then try to secure the edges as best as you can, just to get really good plastic to soil contact. It will superheat the soil below and will help to cook or kill some of those weed seeds to prep the area for a fall time planting. So something, if you're getting ready to prep the area, you might want to consider that as a technique as well. And finally, my last tip, I just want to say, keep an eye on pest advisories this year. We have moved up on timetables for a lot of things. This one I pulled is codling moth for apple and pear. We're about 2 weeks in our spray windows. And if you look at Salt Lake here, actually our first spray date recommended was April 27th for Taylorsville and Sandy. So this is also true with other types of landscape pests. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on these pest advisories and maybe looking at them a little sooner than you normally would for certain pests, just that those timetables may have moved up a little bit. So that's it for me, and let me stop share.
Awesome. Great tips, Katie. Thank you. Ben.
Right. Okay, can you guys see that okay? I hope. Sweet. All right. So I had just two tips as well coming from the southern part of the state. One, this time of year is a really exciting time for gardeners and for people that have their trying to revamp their landscape because you can select, this is a good time to select plants basically. One of the tips I had is pick something that has some color. Um, there's a lot of talk on pollinators and pollinator habitat around the state, especially on a really dry year. We're going to be a little bit lower on some of our blooms. So including, just for some consideration, include some color in your landscapes. For southern Utah, I selected some of the plants that are kind of more native that may not require as much water. There's definitely more that you could look at. There's some of our ornamentals like rosemary, lavender that are phenomenal as well. The ones that I put on this list are just a little bit more native and drought tolerant to the area. But it gives you some color, some texture to your landscape. It makes it kind of fun. I prefer perennials, but you can definitely do annuals as well. The perennials are nice because you can get them to establish. One of the things to keep in mind with perennials is if you get them planted this year, this is a great time to plant them before we get too hot. If you don't get blooms the first year, don't worry about that too much. It takes them a little while to establish, and then they'll bloom more and more as they age and establish a little bit better. But some of our native plants, we have a lot of penstemons. Blanket flower is the big picture down in the bottom corner. It's one of my favorites. I actually have it here in my window. You can kind of see it. This is the year without a winter. So that one has actually been green and growing the entire winter. So I can look out my window. I started getting flowers in January, which is just bizarre. But I haven't watered it either. It's in a spot that I got it established, and then I haven't watered it for years. But there's yarrow, 4 o'clock, Prince's Plume, globe mallow. There's a couple different varieties of that. Chocolate flower is a small yellow flower. Desert marigolds. All of them have their different colors, textures, and virtues. The one thing I would say about desert marigold, for example, is that if there's water around it, it will spread wherever there's water, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But just some things to keep in mind with all of them. They're kind of fun. The second tip, just really briefly, I touched on this one last time as well. This year's just been kind of crazy with some of our applications for our regular pre-emergence. And a lot of, if you have areas that are not lawn, they're typically going to be gravel. Some of the things that Katie mentioned, using a pre-emergent will help keep those weeds down, but timing is critical. So we're in a window in southern Utah, at least, where if you have a lot of summer weeds, like your puncture vine, tumbleweeds, we're kind of in a window where you can apply and get ahead of those a little bit. Where everything, as Katie mentioned as well, we're a couple of weeks ahead because it is the year without a winter. So it's everything's a little warmer and just moving along a little bit quicker. So if you use pre-emergence, I would try and get those on sooner rather than later. And that's my two tips. And well, I'm excited to hear from Kelly. So we'll turn it back over to you, Candace and Kelly.
Awesome. The year without a winter. Very well said. Thank you both for sharing. We will make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. We'll do a Q&A session at the end, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. If you guys could use the Q&A feature versus the chat, that just helps me stay a little more organized. Kelly, I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. Kelly is a professor and extension specialist in the Plant, Soils, and Climate Department at Utah State University, and she also directs USU Center for Water Efficient Landscaping and is the U.S. representative to the International Turfgrass Society. She has done some really interesting research that focuses on outdoor water use and conservation and sustainable management practices, and she's also a fantastic educator. So I'm really excited to learn from you today. And with that, I will turn the time over to you.
Okay, thanks, Candace. How's that look? Good. All right. Well, like Candace said, I'm USU's Extension Water Conservation and Turfgrass Specialist, and I hope that by the end of the presentation, you will see how those two things actually work quite well together. But before I get too much into the presentation, I did just want to share a little bit about our Center for Water Efficient Landscaping, which is a center based at USU that was founded by the legislature in 1999. So we've been doing this work for quite a long time, and we conduct research on all aspects of water efficient landscaping. And then we also conduct educational programs and outreach to share the research-based information that we develop. So that's us. We've got 5 faculty members, 2 research technicians, anywhere from 6 to 12 graduate students, really working hard to help Utah reduce its outdoor water use. So having said that, I'm here today to talk about turf grasses and hopefully dispel some of the myths that exist out there about turf grasses in the landscape and how much water they actually require. And I like to start out with this image because I think in the conversation about turf grass, I hear it is often discussed almost as though it's not even a plant, but in fact, it is a plant. And as a plant, it provides a lot of services in the environment, including producing oxygen like every other plant, and has some particular unique advantages in that it can retain water on a landscape and prevent stormwater runoff. It can create some biofiltration of rainfall and stormwater. It also does an incredible job of cooling the atmosphere. So as we are warming in the environment, that's going to become more important. And so plants that help us to cool our environment should be a big part of our future. And so I like to often say we need more plants, not fewer plants. I will always be saying that. Now, the choices you make about those plants is something to consider, but plants, including grasses, provide so many benefits that we don't want to lose as we consider how we irrigate our landscapes and what approaches we'd like to take. Now, of course, we've been discussing the winter that wasn't. I couldn't agree more. I was a little happy about it because I had 4 new fruit trees that seemed to survive okay during winter. But here we are now, and we are obviously facing some real challenges with water this year. This is the worst drought we've had in 1,200 years, which is no small thing. I'm recalling back in 2021, we were also in a really very serious situation, which led us to do some research that I'll share with you today that's going to be relevant for the presentation. So I'm going to be talking just for a couple of seconds about plant water use and physiology. I won't dwell on that in the interest of time, but then I'm also going to be talking about turf grasses and how you can make choices about which turf grasses you might use in the landscape. I'm going to talk about relevant water conservation technologies, and then wind up with some maintenance practices that are also relevant for water conservation. So, of course, water is critical for plant physiological purposes, like moving water and nutrients through the plants, supporting energy breakdown. And it's a major component of all the plant's cells. So very, very important. But when we're thinking about turf grasses in the landscape, we're thinking about how the turf grass plant relates to the soil and then the water that may be falling in the form of precipitation, or perhaps we're applying it in the form of irrigation. But it's absolutely necessary for all plant processes. And it moves from the soil to the plant in response to physical forces. So it has to do with the relationship of water pressure in the plant versus the soil. But that's how water moves into the roots of plants, including turf grasses. Now, oh, that didn't turn out exactly what I was hoping for. I did want to pose a couple of questions to you all. One, and I think this is surprising to folks, because again, when I hear turf grasses talked about in general, it's often presented as one thing. But in fact, there are 9 different turf grass species that are commonly used in landscapes. So you can see them listed there: Kentucky bluegrass, tall fescue, perennial ryegrass, the fine fescues, etc. And then the other thing that people don't realize quite often is that within those species, there can literally be thousands of varieties. So taking Kentucky bluegrass as an example, there are literally thousands, there have been thousands of varieties of bluegrass over time. And today there are several hundred varieties that are commercially available. So when we talk about grasses, it's not just as simple as all grass is all the same all the time. They are incredibly different in terms of their appearance, their water requirements, very importantly for today. And so that's something that I like folks to keep in mind when I'm talking about grasses in the landscape. So in terms of choices, there's a few things to consider. First and foremost is the functionality of the area. So we often hear turf grass talked about in terms of its function for sports, for play. And from there, we can consider what species and varieties we might like to see. We might consider the climate or the weather conditions in which we're growing those species, which is going to be wildly different from northern to southern Utah. So it was really nice to have Katie and Ben today, because they're representing that diversity in the state. We also think about evapotranspiration, which is a description of how much water is lost from the soil and plant system over the course of the growing season, and it has a bearing on what we're trying to replace with irrigation. And so turfgrass species and even varieties have different levels of evapotranspiration. And so that's something we keep in mind when we're thinking about irrigation. And then the other thing to consider is the drought tolerance and resilience of different turfgrass species, which is also widely ranging, and I'll share some of that with you. And then lastly, general maintenance practices that we can do to optimize the water use efficiency of our turfgrass systems. So this is a lot. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. In this case, you've got the different species that we commonly use here in Utah listed on the left, and then their relative water requirements, relative fertility requirements, which is primarily considering how much nitrogen they require. And I'll talk more about that towards the end. But then also their drought tolerance, their shade tolerance. What do they look like when they're mowed? And how do they stand up to traffic and wear? So don't get bogged down too much in this. I'm happy to share it with anybody who'd like to. But I do want you to notice how different the requirements and tolerances are for these different species. And I also want to specifically point out crested wheatgrass, which is a turfgrass species that we can grow here in Utah, as having a very low water requirement, because that very low actually means that that particular species can survive without supplemental irrigation in many parts of the state once it's established. So I think, again, this is a thing that I think a lot of people don't realize. There's a grass that doesn't require supplemental irrigation once it's established. There are other grasses on this list that do. Another thing that I will point out is Kentucky bluegrass. So within the hundreds of varieties that we currently have available to us, some of them require a lot less water than standard Kentucky bluegrass varieties. So just keep in mind that there are wide-ranging differences among species and varieties. So I mentioned evapotranspiration, and a few years ago, I had the pleasure of working with our webinar host, Candace, on this fact sheet when she used to be with USU and with our Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. But it describes how the concept of evapotranspiration can be used when scheduling irrigation. And again, this is just looking at how much water is being lost from the soil and plant system in a given weather condition, and then how much we want to replace of what's being lost. So that QR code will take you to that particular fact sheet. And I've got a few QR codes through the presentation, and I'll try to pause and give you time to check those out if you'd like to. Now, back to evapotranspiration. Depending on species, the rate of evapotranspiration can be really, really different. So there, again, very low. We've got crested wheatgrass there. We've got buffalo grass there. Those are one warm season grass species and one cool season grass species that have very, very low rates of evapotranspiration and so have low irrigation requirements. And then as you move down, we've got a little bit more evapotranspiration happening on a daily basis until you get to very high, which includes some varieties of tall fescue, some varieties of Kentucky bluegrass, but we have improved varieties of those as well. This is just meant to give you an idea of the relative rates of evapotranspiration across species. Again, really emphasizing that it is wildly different across species and varieties. So here's another way to just compare those. So I mentioned warm season grasses and cool season grasses in the previous slide. And without getting into too much detail, those just describe their favorite growing conditions. So cool season grasses prefer cool temperatures, warm season grasses prefer warm temperatures. So historically, we've used more cool season grasses in Utah. The most drought tolerant of those are the wheat grasses, which I've mentioned already a couple of times. And then you can see the relative drought tolerance there. For the warm season grasses, Bermuda grass is considered the most drought tolerant species. And then there are some others there that buffalo grass and zoysia grass are some that we use in Utah. The other three, not as much, although I think that may change in the future. So this gives you a sense of the relative drought tolerance of these grasses. And then once you have some understanding of that, you can do some more digging and find more information on varieties within those species that can work well for us. So we do a lot of turfgrass species and variety trialing at our research farm in Logan as well as elsewhere. And part of the reason for that is that we know we need turf grasses in our landscapes for functional purposes, for play, for sports, etc. At the same time, we need to be as cognizant as we can about our weather conditions and the drought that we're currently in. So proper management and then also selection of drought-tolerant turfgrass species and cultivars, it's critical in light of what we're dealing with now and in what we've been dealing with in the past. But not only that, it's something that I hope we can all work toward just on a routine basis. This is something that we can easily do without any loss of quality to our landscapes that will allow us to save a significant amount of water. So again, we conduct lots and lots of these trials. This is not a comprehensive list, but it does list some of the grasses that we have worked with, the conditions that we have evaluated them under, whether that's sort of standard irrigation or drought conditions. It also lists some of the organizations that we cooperate on with these trials. And again, not an exhaustive list, but just meant to demonstrate how much of this we do and how focused we are on reducing turfgrass water use in the state. So for all of these, you can see on the right an aerial view of some of our trials. All of those tiny little squares represent different varieties and species. And when we're installing something like that, it is literally back-breaking work. We are very carefully spreading seed there in the image on the left. And then in the image on the right, what you see is a rainout shelter, because some of this work requires absolute exclusion of any precipitation. So this is what that shelter looks like in the distance. But what it allows us to do is to evaluate these grasses without any supplemental irrigation. And so we might impose two different kinds of drought stress with these grasses. So could be chronic drought stress, meaning that we decrease the irrigation to, for example, 50% of ET per week, and then we watch how the green cover changes over time using digital imagery. Or we might impose, more commonly, we might impose acute drought stress, which means once we get these established, we stop irrigating completely to see how they do. And we may have several dozen varieties in a given test, but we will not irrigate until the top performing variety reaches 25% green cover. So what does that look like? For example, one trial we did with the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance was focused on tall fescue. So what you see here are, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 varieties of tall fescue. And they were not irrigated for 10 weeks, but you can hopefully see, depending on your screen, the difference in color across varieties. Some of these look absolutely fine after 10 weeks without irrigation, some not so much. But that's why we do these trials, is so that we can identify the varieties that perform the best here in Utah. So this was very productive for us and actually led to a project that we did in cooperation with the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities to develop a customized low water use turfgrass seed mixture that they provide to their customers at cost. So the annual irrigation requirement for this particular mixture is half of what standard varieties might use. And so that is obviously a significant water savings. This project was installed at a pump station in West Valley. I know there's somebody from West Valley on the webinar, which is great. Maybe this is near your home. But at this site, the existing turf was mowed short, and that was a standard higher water use variety of grass prior. And it was sprayed with non-selective herbicide. And then we overseeded directly into the stubble in September of 2021. And if you recall, that was another really big drought year. So we overseeded into the stubble, top dressed it with compost, and it was well established within about 6 weeks. And since that time, the water use on this property has been reduced by 50%. So that is a really significant water use reduction. But I will point out, and you can see it in the image here, it wasn't just about transitioning the turf in this case. The project was really meant to emulate what a homeowner might do. And a homeowner might say, you know, I don't need all of the turf grass I've got in my landscape, but I still want a functional amount for me and my kids, my pets, and everyone else. And so the turf grass area was reduced, transitioned to low water use turf. And again, the water use on the site has been reduced by 50%, and the mowing as well has been reduced significantly. So there are multiple benefits here from using these low water use turf grass varieties. Now we do have, I'm just going to pull this out for a minute. We do have available now to us in this state, we've gotten a special carve out, I'll call it that, from the state weed board for using hybrid Bermuda grasses. And hybrid Bermuda grasses are related to common Bermuda grass, but they are not the same. They are sterile and they are non-invasive. So we have the option of using these now, and they are incredibly drought tolerant. In fact, some of them use 70% less water than some of our cool season grasses. So I'm excited about the possible use of these grasses in the state, and I know that it's gaining traction. And the QR code you see there is actually for a webinar that our Center for Water Efficient Landscaping is having next month on hybrid Bermuda grasses. So if this is of interest to you, I would encourage you to sign up for that webinar. Very similar format to the one we have here today. Okay, now using the turf grass trialing information. So again, we work really hard to develop this information. There are a lot of other universities across the country doing the same. And what you see listed there are some of the organizations that we cooperate with and who provide information from us. They share the information from us with the public on which varieties perform best in which locations. So we cooperate with all of them as well as private companies, and that is ongoing. So accessing this information online is one way to learn more about species and varieties options. But we also have this fact sheet through USU Extension, which I update periodically with the best varieties by species for use here in the state of Utah. So you can access that through that QR code. But again, please do keep in mind that it is updated on a fairly regular basis. So you'll want to go back to it. Okay, so moving on to some technological solutions for reducing water use in lawn areas. I like to start out with the low-tech solutions because a lot of times low-tech solutions are the easiest and they can result in significant water savings. So looking at things like overspray of sprinklers, checking water pressure, not only at the sprinkler head, but in the entire system, compensating for wind, and then routine maintenance. All of these things you might call an irrigation audit. They are things that should be done at least once per year to keep an irrigation system functioning properly. And we have a program like this in the Salt Lake and Sandy service areas where we evaluate residential landscapes, parks, schools, etc., any place that's got an automated irrigation system, and look at the problems in that system, do some specific testing, and give our participants a customized irrigation schedule. So we've been doing that program since 1999. And I think that the reason it has continued is that the water savings from this program is rather significant. So detailed analyses we've done, in this case, we used a smart home water monitoring device. And we looked at 59 households. And in the month following their participation in a water check, they reduced their water use by 626,000 acres, or almost 2 acre feet, in the single month following the water check. So on average, participants reduced water use by 30%. So that's been quite effective and has allowed us to evaluate the low-tech things like how's the irrigation system operating, but also implement some higher tech like this smart home water monitoring to evaluate the program. Now, that is not, the in-person water checks are not available everywhere in the state at this time. So we also have developed web-based tools to help folks do this process on their own. And I'd also like to encourage you to contact your local USU County Extension office because they can also provide support for you to do this on your own, as well as materials like catch cups to conduct the test. Now, higher tech solutions, we have got available to us now so many great things: soil moisture sensors, frost sensors, wind sensors, rain sensors. We've got subsurface drip irrigation option, which can also work in turfgrass areas. And we've got integrated weather and controller systems that might be described as smart irrigation control that I'll get into. And then community-based irrigation schedules. So we have evaluated several different smart irrigation controllers at our research farm. We started out many years ago looking at some of the first generation smart controllers that you see listed there. They require different sorts of data to operate, but we evaluated them to see how much water they allowed for irrigation and how that compares to what people typically do. In later years, as these products have been developed, we've continued and we've looked at Wi-Fi enabled controllers, which can be programmed and monitored from a smartphone from anywhere in the world that you've got an internet connection. And it's been really fantastic in terms of the possible water savings associated with these controllers. So the first group, the climate-based controllers that we looked at, reduced water use anywhere from 35 to 51%. The second group, the Wi-Fi enabled controllers, reduced water use anywhere from 29 to 55%. So that is an incredible amount of water savings. But we weren't just looking at water. We were also looking at things like turf grass quality, canopy temperature, all of those things, because we understand that if the landscape isn't maintaining quality, even if we've got all these technological solutions to bring to bear, people are not going to be excited about it, right? And so the good news in these studies was that the turf grass quality was not negatively affected by these reduced water applications. So huge potential for water savings, still maintaining landscape quality. So I'm a really strong proponent of these controllers. And by the way, anyone in the state of Utah can get a rebate for one of these controllers now through slowtheflow.org. So I would encourage you to check that out. Now on the really high tech end, this is maybe more for the highly managed turf grass areas like golf courses and things like that. We have also used remote imagery to look at quantifying ET across the growing season in real time. So again, this is a very high-tech approach, but it is one that we're working on in certain scenarios. Now, another really big one, and Katie actually talked a bit about this at the beginning, we're really encouraging folks in the state to wait at least until May 15th to begin any type of irrigation. And actually, I just today saw some information about weather patterns coming up for the beginning of May, and it's looking like in many parts of the state, we will be receiving more precipitation. So what I'm hoping then is that we can postpone irrigation even longer than May 15th, but we will see how things go in May. But essentially with irrigation scheduling, changing that schedule with the growing season is critically important. Using things like rain shutoff devices, frost shutoff devices can also be incredibly helpful. And then you can do things like cycling irrigation to help prevent runoff and deep percolation. But you also need to consider the temperature and wind. Now, that's a lot to consider, but fortunately, our friends at the Division of Water Resources have this fantastic lawn watering guide that they put out every week. And it is based on ET, evapotranspiration, that is measured throughout the state. And so they now have both a lawn watering guide on the right there for standard water use turf grasses, as well as a low water turf grass watering guide on the left. So that's what you're going to want to be paying attention to if you're using some of the certified low water use varieties. But that's a fantastic resource. And you can also access support from, again, your USU County Extension folks. Now I'm going to move on to some maintenance things because there are some maintenance practices that we do with our turf grass areas that can have a huge bearing on water use. So for example, mowing. You may not realize how the height you mow at affects water use of turf grass, but there's a direct relationship between the height of the grass and the depth of the roots. So if I can use my little arrow here, if this is the soil surface here, you can see the higher this grass is mowed, the deeper the roots grow. And I believe it was Katie also talked about the rain we've had and soil moisture being pushed further down in the soil profile. That's going to also encourage those roots to grow deeply. But what I want to direct your eyes to is the range of mowing heights there on the right across the species that we commonly use on the left, and especially the higher range. Because if folks can mow higher, like there's 3 inches there for bluegrass, tall fescue, etc., that is going to encourage that deeper rooting. It is going to allow the grass to maintain quality even as we get drier and warmer through the summer. And not only that, but mowing higher, especially during what I think is going to be a rather warm summer, it also helps the turf grass to still look good and maintain quality at the surface, even as it dries. So that's another reason to keep that mowing height high. Now, I will say a few other things about mowing height. You know, as you cut turf high, it does increase water use to some extent because you've got more leaf surface area. But low cut turf, even though you've got less water use, creates a lot of other challenges like the potential for disease and other types of damage and more susceptibility to stress, perhaps due to insects or diseases. So you want to increase height to increase water use efficiency because that's going to increase it due to better rooting and rooting mass as well as depth. So the idea here is you're enhancing that rooting depth while minimizing leaf surface area. So the bottom line really is you want to keep mowing at a higher height. So the higher end of that range I just showed you, but do so more often. So each time you mow, you're taking off a small amount of leaf area. That is going to be the most healthful condition for the turf grass. Now moving on to another really common turf grass practice, fertilization. Fertilization is something we typically have to do in our climate because our soils don't have a lot of nitrogen naturally. And so we're often supplementing that so that the grass can function as we need it to and maintain quality that we'd like to see. Now, if it is fertilized too much, that actually creates a high water use situation because there can be a lot of leaf growth without the same amount of root growth. And so those leaves are up at the surface saying, hey, roots, send up some water. And the roots are down below saying, hey, I'm doing all I can and I can't do any more. So you don't want to over fertilize. And I'm going to share a little bit about an experiment we've done related to this. But it is a good way to address how much water turf grass is using. And again, avoiding excessive nitrogen fertilization is something we should do. And we've got a lot of information about that through USU Extension. And I'll share more as I go on. Now, there are some other nutrient considerations. Potassium can be helpful in drought conditions, but our soils often have enough of that. And the other one I'll touch on here is iron, because iron is something that our soils tend to be a little bit stingy with. And so we may want to supplement that because it actually produces some quality improvements like nitrogen does without that flush of growth that nitrogen can cause. Now, I do, as I'm wrapping up, just want to share some information about drought studies that we've done at USU that relate to what I think we're going to be seeing this summer. My colleague, Dr. Melanie Stock, and graduate student Sammy Paccarel here looked at day versus night irrigation because that's something that we often hear. Don't water between 10 and 6, I think is what I've heard most recently. And so they took a really detailed look at water use between turf grass and zinnias in this case, and whether or not irrigating at nighttime was going to save water. And this was an incredibly detailed study. It involved a lot of instrumentation, a lot of complex analyses, but in the end, what they have found was that during the day, the losses of irrigation water due to wind drift were higher. But ET tended to be a bit higher when irrigation happened at night. So the bottom line here is that two things. There were not any differences in quality in terms of turf grass or yield for the zinnias, whether you irrigated during the day or the night. But when it was windy, that was a problem. And so what I have said to folks as a result of this research is that really pay attention to when it's most windy where you are located, because you definitely don't want to irrigate at that time. That is the bottom line for that. And this was recently published. If you're interested in the details, this is open access, so anybody can have a look at this. But it was a really interesting project. And again, wind seemed to be a big part of irrigation water loss. So we want to avoid that. Now, we have also done a couple of other drought-related studies. In this case, we were looking at nitrogen, and we were also looking at reduced irrigation. So in this case, irrigating about half what we might in relation to evapotranspiration, and then looking at different rates of fertilization. So either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet over the growing season. So what we found here was that things became rather dormant in June in this particular study, but started to recover a little bit in July. And then as we got into August, things were really recovering quite a bit. Again, keep in mind, this is getting about half the irrigation that we might in a typical situation. So those yellow squares are around the plots that got 6 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. But you can see by September, things are all looking rather similar and certainly of acceptable quality. I will just note here that what we observed with the higher rates of fertilization, especially that 6 pounds per 1,000 square feet, was that while it tended to be a bit greener it also tended to wilt more quickly. And so what we are recommending is no more than 4 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet for fertilizing turf grass. And then you can still reduce irrigation and maintain quality. Now, another study we did, I call this the extreme irrigation study, because in this case, we were looking at an old established stand of bluegrass, nothing special, nothing low water use. And we looked at irrigating 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, or 1 inch per month during the growing season in 2021. So again, that was the last really rough year we had, and we were really trying to get a handle on how low we could go, so to speak, for these grasses. And in this case, again, we saw a lot of dormancy, but things did start to recover as things cooled off towards the end of the growing season. And really, by the fall of that year, we were getting essentially full recovery, even on the plots that were only getting as little as 1/4 inch of water per month. So what I like to tell folks is that grasses are tough. They are tough. They are resilient. Yes, I expect we're going to see a lot of turf grass dormancy this year, which is just when the leaves go that straw color, maybe light brown color. I get a lot of calls at that time of year, panicked that, oh, my lawn is dead. That is almost never the case. It is an absolutely normal process for grass plants to go into dormancy when things are hot and dry, for the cool season grasses. And so as little as 1/4 inch of water every 2 weeks is good for maintaining and surviving through a hot, dry summer. And we often get that much just in the form of natural precipitation. We'll see what happens this year. But the point being that a minimal amount of irrigation can keep our cool season grasses alive through a hot summer like I expect we're going to see here today. Okay, now lastly, I did just put together a new informational fact sheet on training turf grass for drought resilience. So this was literally published yesterday. You can access it through the link there. It's 1 page, both sides, but it's a lot of tips and guidelines on how to both irrigate turf grass efficiently, but also improve soil health in the longer term so that irrigation can be reduced even further. I didn't have a chance to talk a lot about soil today, but soil preparation and quality are really critical to the longer term water use of a landscape. And so I do address that a bit here in this particular publication. So I think I did okay on time, Candace, and I'm going to stop there.
That was perfect.
Okay.
That was a fabulous presentation. There were a lot of resources that were shared. I will send a follow-up email to everybody that just kind of summarizes all of them. So if you missed a few, don't stress. This is also being recorded and we'll get it on YouTube shortly. So if you want to review, it'll be there for you. Okay, we've had some great questions come through. I want to start with the turf grass trials. So there was a great question just about the rainout shelters and if they have any other impacts on the grass. Like, do they increase or decrease temperature or solar radiation?
Yes, great question. So they do have, that's something we were concerned about. The one potential impact they have is reducing solar radiation, but we actually measure that both under the shelter and outside the shelter, and it's turned out that it's quite minimal. But that's why we have that clear plastic cover, which we do replace over time, because even as that gets scratched up by dust and things like that, it affects solar radiation. So we make sure that that effect is minimal. But other than that, we don't have any effect except for excluding rainfall.
That's good to know. Where are there public gardens or places people can go to see examples of these types of grasses?
Yes, yes. I'm aware of a few. So Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District has a conservation garden park. They've got several there. Seagull Lily Gardens in Sandy also has several. I'm trying to think. I know there are some others as well.
Weber Basin has a few.
Weber Basin Water Conservancy District also has a number of them on display.
They just did a huge chunk of or a large area where they replaced Kentucky blue with the Bermuda grass.
Yes, they did. Yes, because they're looking at providing rebates for turf grass transitions.
That'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, if someone's not a Salt Lake City resident, can they still purchase that grass seed mix? Or what resources would be
Oh,
available?
yes, yes. Thank you for asking that. So, as a result of that program, we've got a lot more commercially available seed mixtures. So I can share with you the ones that I'm aware of, and this is not, I don't think this is a comprehensive list, but Granite Seed in Lehigh has this mixture. Biograss in South Jordan has this mixture. Uh, there are a couple of sod companies that have mixtures like this. So Chanshare Sod Farms in Tremonton has it. Bulldog Sod in Layton has it. And I need to try to develop a bigger list, but they are becoming more and more commercially available. And the Turfgrass Water Conservation Alliance is working, and I need to check on whether they've accomplished this yet, but they're working on getting them into the big box stores like the Home Depots and the Lowe's and the things like that. So it is becoming more and more available.
Oh, that's so
Definitely.
great. It's such a big, just in the last few years, like
Oh,
we've
yeah.
made such great strides. It's
Yeah.
impressive. I love this question. Can you overseed your Kentucky bluegrass lawn with drought tolerant varieties?
Yes, yes. In fact, that's exactly what we did at that demo area in Salt Lake City. But we did have to kill the bluegrass first. You have to, in order to give your low water use seed a fighting chance, you need to give it a fighting chance by killing what's there. But that's exactly what we did. We killed it, we mowed it really short, and then we overseeded directly into it with a broadcast spreader. It couldn't have been easier. And by the way, if you Google SLC turf trade, there are actually videos that describe the entire process as well.
Awesome. I'll be sure to throw those in the follow-up resource as well. Just gonna make a note so I don't forget. Okay. What about mixing like warm and cool season grasses so you don't have that period of dormancy?
Yeah, that's such a good question. If we could do that, I think that'd be an ideal scenario. But the challenge is this. We have tried to do that, and at first it's okay, and you have a nice mixture, and everything's about 50-50. But it's just about impossible not to favor one over the other. And so the issue isn't that you can't do it, the issue is maintaining it. So over time, you tend to favor one or the other depending on how you're managing it. So yeah, we haven't quite cracked that yet, but hopefully we will in the future, and we'll be able to maintain even mixtures.
Awesome. And then what are your thoughts about mixing in like a yarrow or a clover into
Yeah.
your Kentucky bluegrass?
Yeah, you can definitely do that. In fact, I was at a training at Jordan Valley last week, and we did an irrigation audit of one of their lawn areas, which is, how do they describe it? Mixed, I guess they call it a mixed species lawn, but it's Kentucky bluegrass, but it's got yarrow, it's got clover, it's got a whole bunch of other stuff. And I think that's absolutely fine. Those The one thing I will say is, again, maintaining the mixture can be a little bit tricky, but what I've seen there at Jordan Valley is that they are maintaining that mixture, and it's sort of a nice sort of 30-30-30 blend of all of those different types of plant materials. And yarrow in particular is just tough as nails. Holy moly. I mean, for me, not my favorite. I just converted my own yard to low water use grass over the past couple of years, and sort of yarrow was sort of the bane of my existence. But again, it is tough as nails, and I think it can be fine in a combination like that. And it's all depending on your likes, wants, and needs, and how you need the area to function.
Cool. I like that. Is the yarrow pretty aggressive? Like in time, do you think the Kentucky bluegrass will fade out?
I think it depends on how it's managed, kind of like with the warm and cool season. But yeah, I mean, if you're really, really, really conservative with the water, over time, the yarrow will be incredibly competitive in that scenario.
Mm,
Yeah.
good to be aware of.
Mhm.
Let's backtrack to smart controllers quick. We
Okay.
do have, and I'll send information to everybody, but we do have a statewide rebate where if you don't have a smart controller, we'll give you $100 towards the purchase of a new one if you haven't had one on that property before. You mentioned not watering when it's windy. I know the smart controller I have is awesome. Like it'll send me an alert and it'll say, "Hey, it's going to be really windy tonight, so we're going to skip this watering and then we'll make up for it tomorrow."
Right.
Do all smart controllers do that, or is that brand specific?
It is brand specific. So First of all, I hope everyone will take advantage of that rebate. I think that we are the only state I know of in the entire country that offers that to every resident. It's really remarkable. But there are a lot of them out there now, and they've got a lot of different characteristics. So they don't all have that, Katie. But if it were me, and based on what I've learned after living in Utah for 25 years, it's windy here. So I would prioritize that. I would definitely prioritize that, especially after what we learned with that day versus night irrigation study. I mean, wind was really just, you can imagine it just takes the water away from where you want it. So none of us wants that. So I would say, do a little research on them. There's one I particularly like. I'm not going to name names here, but it's just because I like the way the phone app works, so you got to look at all that sort of thing. What's going to work for you and how you access the information. Yeah.
Great suggestions. Well, Kelly, this was amazing. Really appreciate your time. Questions were great. Thanks everybody for joining. And hopefully we see you all next month.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.